Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
How's the team doing here?
Great. I think if it just turned 1 o'clock, I think we can go ahead and get started. I'd like to say welcome to all of you. Thank you for taking time to join us today. We're just delighted to see so many of you here, and we are recording this. We know this is a really busy day for a lot of you. I think grades are due for our fall one classes, and so we know that that takes priority as well. So we are recording, and we'll make that recording available. But we started hosting this fall retention workshop 2 years ago, in addition to the annual retention retreat that takes place at the end of each February. And these are really important opportunities to come together, to share information and ideas, and hopefully some inspiration related to student retention. And today we're specifically focusing on the retention of our first-time full-time freshmen. And you'll hear some data about what we know about why some of those students don't stick with us and what we hope to do about that. And definitely this is a community-wide exercise and activity in retaining our students. And so it's not just one person or even a team of people, it's all of us that play a role in this. We have a great lineup for you this afternoon, but before I pass it over to Dr. Porter to say a few words, to kick us off, I'd like to say thank you to the planning team, particularly Dr. Kate Harrell, who led these efforts, Dr. Peter Weitzel, Dr. Aaron Schilling, Dr. Kevin Manley, and a few other people that I'm sure I'm missing out here on the list. But that really was the core group in leading the efforts today. And I think that you'll find today's session very informative. And to help us kick things off, we've asked Dr. Porter to say a few words. So I'll pass it over to Dr. Porter at this time.
All right, thank you, Dr. Olden Rivers. Appreciate that. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us today for this 2022 retention workshop. We frequently discuss the importance of enrollment management, and the urgent need to increase our enrollment. And of course, we've had a great start to the year. However, a very important part of the university enrollment strategy is retention, as you all know. And so once our students come through our doors, it is our responsibility to help them realize that they belong here and help them feel supported throughout their entire time here at Lindenwood. To do this well, we really must take serious a multifaceted approach. There's no single silver bullet that answers that. So this year we are enjoying a large cohort of first-time full-time freshmen than in the past. So this represents both challenges and certainly opportunities for our university. So we continue to focus on retaining first-time full-time freshmen, as this impacts our academic reputation and certainly our financial stability. I'm proud of the work we do inside and outside of the classroom. Each of you has shown your commitment to student success, and I truly am grateful for that. You know as well as I do that there is always work to do, especially when our work is so impactful to the lives of our learners in our community. And I want to thank you all for your dedication to retaining our students. And it's important to know that, as we look at numbers and of course, you all know I like metrics and numbers and those kinds of things and dashboards. I was talking to some folks over the weekend in higher education, and just talking about the cost of acquiring a new student as opposed to keeping a student is really exponential. And you think about, and I've used this example before, that the average acquisition cost of a student here is about $2,300, and you think about those that don't retain and stay. And so you think about that, those dollars going right down the tube, and not to mention what we lose on our tuition and room and board. And so as Dr. Alden Rivers and I had discussions months ago, I said, the expectation is that we have the robustness of our academic programming, and I make no bones about it. Although I love athletics and love what we do, academics is our #1 priority at this university. And as Dr. Alden Rivers and I discussed, I said, if I were to give her one thing to really drive hard this year, outside of the robustness of the quality and all the academic stuff, which is assumed, it would be our retention. And so I appreciate how serious we are all taking this. And it just didn't come up over the last couple of months. We've been really focused on this for a long time, but we've really got to get even more into, what is our strategy? How do we really drive this? And we don't want to really wait years before we get to a level that is where our peers are at. We want to do that sooner rather than later. And so I've really challenged Dr. Alden Rivers to really drive this sooner rather than later, and for us to see some great outcomes by fall of next year. So the freshmen, our first-time freshmen that have come on board this fall, we really want to be in the 80-ish percentiles for next year. And so we've got a lot of work ahead of us. But I would tell you, I know that this team is focused. And I don't say that lightly, and that we're all our heads in this whole thing. And so I appreciate the work that you're doing, that you're going to continue to do. I will help in any way possible, because again, I even mentioned this to our board, our chairman, that this really is our focus of our provost and certainly the entire institution, myself included. So thank you for this opportunity just to kick off with a few words. And I'm going to stay on just for a few minutes. I know Peter Weitzel is up, and he's our interim chief data officer. And Peter's going to be sharing some data about this cohort. And so I look forward to hearing some things that Peter has to say. So let me go ahead and turn it right over to Peter.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. Can everybody see that? I'm going to assume, all right, good deal. All right. Yeah, so we are going to talk about basically an analysis of the last two cohorts where we have retained around 77%. I want to acknowledge up front, a lot of this work was done by Aaron Schilling with his psych background in social psych, a lot of concepts around belonging and other things like that, very relevant, and I want to acknowledge his work there. So what are we talking about when we're talking about retention? Federal definition, first-time full-time freshmen that start in the fall. This is almost entirely on-ground traditional students. Every now and then, one or two online students would meet criteria and would be included in our IPEDS cohorts, but this is almost entirely traditional on-ground students. The outcome of retention is first fall to second fall. Do they come back for the fall of their second year? And as the title of our presentation implied, we do lose about 23% of students in that first fall to second fall. Year to year, there's a little bit of kind of statistical noise of it bumping up and down, but in general, we are trending upwards gradually on that outcome. You can also look at first fall to spring. And we lose about 8% of our students there. So the big drop off is between spring and fall, but we do lose about 8% from fall to spring. I'm going to kind of jump ahead because I think it's useful on the front end to understand this, and because it may color how you interpret other information we're presenting. We are able to see where non-retained students go through the National Clearinghouse, and we can kind of classify those into someone who has left college entirely, sort of a non-transfer, just an exit, downward transfer to community colleges, a lateral transfer to institutions kind of like us, and upward transfers to more selective institutions. And maybe these results would surprise some of you. It's not the first time we've shared this, but maybe it's the first time it's been shared this widely. This is really important to keep in mind. Across two cohorts, we're talking about 333 non-retained students. 60% of them not enrolled in college. Now, over time, that 60% will decline. They will kind of trickle their way back into college, some of them. But a lot of them are not immediately continuing to another institution, and you have another 20% that are transferring down to community colleges. So put those together, basically 80% of your non-retained students are either transferring down to a community college or leaving. And so it's important to keep that in mind when we start looking at some of the other material here. When we're thinking about what data points do we want to look at, how do we understand this, organize it, we're not flying blind, we're not reinventing the wheel. There's been a lot of study of retention over time. The Tinto retention model is kind of regarded as the gold standard, and there's been a lot of research to support the model. And it starts off with the stuff over on the left side. All this is before college starts. Your family background has some impact on retention. Individual attributes like motivation and study habits and things along those lines, that matters. How you did in high school in terms of high school GPA, ACT scores, all that matters. And then before college starts, there's an initial set of commitments, and those can vary. And I like how they differentiate sort of a general goal commitment and an institutional commitment. So if you take a place like WashU, 100% of their students incoming FTF are going to be committed to getting the bachelor's degree. And a lot of them are probably also committed to even graduate school at that point in some sense. At a place like Lindenwood, that's not necessarily the case. You know, you are going to have some students who are a little bit on the fence of whether or not the bachelor's degree is the way to go for me, right? So part of what we are selling here is institutional commitment, Lindenwood, but I think it's also important to keep in mind that we are also, in a sense, selling the value of the bachelor's degree in and of itself, right? Because not all of your students are coming in the door completely convinced that this is the way to go. So all that happens before college. And then college happens, right? You have an academic element and a social element, and that does include the academic side of the house as well. You have kind of your formal performance in courses, but then there's also intellectual development and perceptions of good things coming, a pathway for me, a career at the end of this, and interesting internships and HIPs along the way, right? All of that is part of academic integration. And then on the social side, this is both, you know, academic and non-academic, of course. But if you're part of a research project, if you've got a job within a college or something like that, I mean, that is academic in a sense, but it is also part of your social integration. And then certainly teams, fraternities, other student groups are also going to be an important part of your social integration. So college happens, and then they kind of revisit this goal, right? How committed I am to this goal overall, how committed am I to this institution, and then they can make a decision or not. So thinking about data, we have, you know, some data in most of these areas. There are spots where the data is a little more solid, right? You have grades, you have formal memberships, you have rosters in student organizations. You've got kind of cut and clean, cut and dried demographics, high school GPAs, etc. We do have data in some of these other areas, and I'll talk about that. But your data in some of these areas is just a little more solid than others. So starting off on kind of the left side of Tinto's model here, we'll talk a little bit about demographics. Like most institutions, we do have lower retention rates for more disadvantaged populations. The size of our gaps is fairly common. What we did see during the cohort that was most affected by COVID was that fall 20 cohort. And we did see kind of a growth or an increase in the size of the Pell versus non-Pell gap and the Black versus white gap in that cohort. But typical has been, you know, around 7 to 10% on most of these demographic gaps. We do also find that a financial aid gap is also a fairly strong predictor, even after you control for other factors. Academic preparation, goal commitment, these are all things that are kind of over on the left side of Tinto's model. High school GPA, which is going to be a reflection both of aptitude as well as work ethic, is one of your single strongest predictors of retention. But getting at this idea of goal commitments or institutional commitments. Now, a lot of our applicants are applying for college in, you know, the fall of their senior year of high school, right? They're more than 200 days out, but we do have some applicants that are coming in late. And, whether or not that's a reflection of ambivalence about the general goal, or maybe they just don't have their plans together. But you do find that late applicants do have, a notably lower retention rate. In older cohorts, we did have a survey question about intent to transfer, and we did find some students come in with some anticipation of that. And you do see a somewhat of a relationship there. Undecided majors also do have lower retention rates. So now moving into college is happening here. We're talking about the academic integration, where we have the most solid data is in grade performance, formal course performance, and the findings here are pretty stark. Even as early as 4 weeks into the first fall term, students that are getting a 4-week grade flag, you guys are probably familiar. We don't have sort of true grades at 4 weeks, but students with low performance are flagged. Students with even 1 4-week grade flag have 10 to 12% lower retention rate. And then when you look at final course grades across the first year, there's really strong relationship here. A lot of students would just end up with 0 or 1 DFWs in their first year courses. I think that's about 70% of our population. But for the 30% that have multiple DFW rates, their retention rates are quite a bit lower, right? They have retention rates below 60%. It's about a 30% gap compared to students with higher degree of course success. So that population with 2 or more DFWs, it's about 30% of our population overall, but it's about 60% of your population that's non-retained. I mean, they are basically twice as much overrepresented in your non-retained population. We do have a survey that gets at some of the, softer concepts that are otherwise difficult to measure. It looks at things like perceptions of study environment and time, monitoring of own learning, financial anxieties, etc. And we do find some modest relationships with lower retention rates. As President Porter noted, there is no smoking gun when it comes to retention. There's no single root cause. You're going to see a lot of these kind of 2 to 5% gaps on particularly, survey concepts like this. But we can take that population of students that has the multiple DFWs and kind of drill down on them specifically. And for students that do have these course struggles, thinking about that survey where you see the bigger gaps is kind of what you might expect, right? It's the bigger gaps are in study environment and time planning for studying, monitoring own learning, self-regulation behaviors as well. We can also drill down on those DFW students and look at the other factors that we covered, from Tinto's model. You do have a higher prevalence of late applicants. You do have somewhat higher financial need, and you do have overrepresentation of minority students in that population of students that end up with multiple DFWs. You might also be curious, can we, instead of focusing on just the retention outcome, maybe we focus on that fall to spring persistence. We do lose 8% of them right off the bat. So we can also focus on that population and drill down. And we do find, again, that academic relationship, whether you're talking about academic preparation in terms of high school GPA or course success, very strong relationship for those kind of 8% of students who don't make it beyond their first term. Moving on to the social side of the house, social integration, where we have the most solid data is in kind of formal membership into a baked-in social group, right? If you're on an NCAA team, you're going to spend hundreds, possibly thousands of hours with your teammates, right? That is, to some extent, a baked-in social group. We do see positive relationships between athletic participation, especially for NCAA, 7 to 10% higher than your non-athlete population. SLS is a little bit higher as well. Greek life has pretty positive relationship with retention as well. In prior risk modeling, we did look at student organizations, and if somebody joined 0 student organizations after we control for other things, there is a modest negative relationship with retention. And being a commuter has a negative association as well. That's not a very big group. It's not a large portion of our cohorts, but they do have somewhat lower retention rates. So far, we've kind of been thinking about these different risk factors kind of one by one. And as we showed, there's a lot of them where there's a 5% gap, a 7% gap, etc. But if you think about it from a student experience perspective, right, they have dimensions or attributes in all those different areas, right? A student might be lower income and have lower high school GPA and run into course struggles or have some evidence of lower commitment, etc. So we can kind of, at a student level, kind of sum up all of these risk factors and put them against retention and see what we get. And when you do that, now you're starting to see sort of much bigger gaps, right? Students with just a couple risk points are retaining 86%, 81%. And then as you start to kind of get more and more of these risk factors, you do see stronger relationships with non-retention. I do want to stress that even for this group that has kind of everything stacked against them, we are still retaining 4 out of 10 there. And the only reason I bring that up is you'll occasionally hear consultants and others talk about, a triage approach where there are some students, there's just no chance you're going to retain them. You shouldn't focus your efforts on them, etc. Well, it's really not true, right? I mean, if you take even your highest risk group, you're still retaining 4 out of 10 of them. And there's nothing to say that the right set of interventions might not change things, right? So you're almost getting 50% of your highest risk group coming back. And over time, we certainly hope that these relationships in some ways get weaker because it means that we're using the risk information and cutting down on the extent of that relationship with non-retention. So college has happened, and now they're coming back to this goal commitment, coming back to this institutional commitment in order to make a decision. And one interesting piece of data that's a little bit of a I don't know, tangent or a side turn here, but I do think is very relevant to keep in mind is in our NETSI results. So keeping in mind that a lot of our students that leave are not staying in college, right? The 60% of them are not continuing with college. Another 20% are transferring downwards. In our NESI results, we had both freshmen and seniors answer a set of questions about career and workforce relevancy. And similar to how we've presented these results, here we do an effect size. How many standard deviations do we differ from kind of a national or regional norm? And for our freshmen, where we had the strongest relationship, you do see some spots that if you're thinking of from the perspective of a student who maybe is not 100% committed to this idea that the bachelor's degree is the way to go, they're answering that what I'm learning at this institution is relevant to my career plans, that I can describe the knowledge, skills, and experiences that are necessary for my career plans. I've received supportive feedback about career plans. A lower proportion of our students are answering positively than at other institutions. And these are not gigantic gaps, 3 to 4 tenths of a standard deviation. But if you're thinking about what are some ways we can appeal to students that maybe don't have that rock solid goal commitment or institutional commitment, this is one of many areas. And I don't want to sort of overemphasize this and again say it's a smoking gun or something, but this is something to keep in mind, right? If you are a program chair, if you have any role in first year programming or curriculum, this might be something to think about. You know, what are we doing that is really demonstrating that career relevance for students that may be a little bit on the fence on whether or not a bachelor's degree is the way to go. We can also look at how those DFW grades relate to the exits, right? Students can laterally transfer, they can transfer to more selective institutions, they can transfer down. And you do see a strong relationship in pretty much the direction you would expect. If you take those students that had 2 or more DFW grades in their first year, almost 60% of them do not have a subsequent institution in the clearinghouse. Another 30% transfer down to community colleges. So basically almost 90% of your students with 2 or more DFW grades are out of college entirely or transferring down to a community college. Now, if you look at the students that did not have as many DFW rates, about 60% either went lateral transfer or upward transfer, right, to more selective institutions. So you do see a really strong relationship there. We often get requests for what do we hear for students when they exit. And I think the amount of emphasis put on this information is maybe more emphasis is put on this than perhaps is warranted by the quality of the data. About 55% of your students that exit don't have exit notes at all. These students really have no compelling reason to kind of share rich information. And then a lot of the information that does come to SAS is indirect, right? It might come from a coach, it might come from an advisor. Sometimes it does come directly from the students, but you know, over half of your departures, you don't have exit on at all, and you don't necessarily get great detail of information. This text may be too small for you guys to see, I'm not sure, but this highest bar here when we code these exit reasons, the highest by far, you know, far and away, probably more than any other even combined, is this: they say I'm going to transfer to another institution. Other things cited: I want to be closer to home, specific programming options, sports comes up a lot. But again, your students at this point are out the door. They don't have a real compelling reason to give you rich information. And so I don't necessarily think a huge amount of tension is warranted on specifically these exit reasons, because you don't even have an exit on half of them. And then of the remainder, the majority provide very minimal information. I'm transferring to another institution. So transitioning from kind of describing the problem into the rest of this workshop, we are focused pretty heavily on the academic success side of things, right? The title of this is "The Academic Struggle is Real," and that is the area where we see kind of the single strongest relationship with non-retention, is those students with the multiple DFW rates in their first year courses. There is a very strong relationship there. We're not emphasizing this information a great deal in this workshop, but I did want to stress this because if there are critical time points in the fall semester, one of them is basically like right now. Right. We, as institutional research, we do what I call sort of curated data sets, where we're going to identify what's the sort of latest or best risk information, what's the population, and pull specifically those students and kind of assemble some useful data points. And we pass those to SAS, and SAS either acts on them, or in some cases is sharing that information with other offices. And one that will be coming any day now would be something related to midterm grades, right? If there is a key time point, a potential turning point for students where we've got good information that they're having struggles, and there's maybe still time to course correct there, that midterm grades is a key moment. And we will be sharing some data pretty soon to help you identify some of the students that are having those kind of struggles in their courses. A few things to take away. This is from a study done at SUNY Brockport. This is kind of social psychologists and behavioral economists kind of studied what are some behavioral insights that we can take away from students, and they did focus groups and interviews, etc. That are not necessarily what are some behavioral problems that are not necessarily about understanding course material or skills in that area that cause students to struggle more than they need to. And when it comes to tutoring, students they dilly-dally, they think about it, they procrastinate, they don't make the decision. They also have the perception that tutoring is for the very worst students, and I'm not among the very worst students. They don't think of it as normal. And then, sometimes just sort of logistical knowledge can be a hindrance there as well. So that's maybe something to keep in mind, even if you're not involved in direct specific interventions. There may be messaging you can do in the classroom or with the students that you do interact with to say, hey, tutoring is normal. If you're even thinking about it, do it soon, right? Don't procrastinate. If you're waiting for November 15th to go see the tutoring, it may be too late, right? If you're having struggles, get with it. The sooner the better. Other kind of behavioral insights they identified: students really sort of underestimate travel complications, other things that can cause them not to get to class on time. They think skipping class is kind of normal. And then students often, they don't plan for study time, and they have overly low perceptions of the amount of studying time that is needed for success. And then some of the studying techniques they are using are less optimal, and they don't really know how to try out different studying approaches. So again, even if you're not involved in specific interventions, these are messages that you may want to keep in mind, right? Can you encourage students to do study groups? Can you put information in front of them about how much time you anticipate is needed in order to have success in this class as far as studying, stressing that being in class is extremely important for overall learning, that type of thing. So I just wanted to share some of those. I believe in Kevin Manley's session, breakout session, he's going to cover some of that as well. Lastly, I know we are all super busy. We have lots of other commitments. If you're thinking about, do we have the time to invest in that? Is it going to be worth it? At least from a financial perspective, the answer is yes. Like President Porter mentioned, it's estimated that the cost to recruit a new student is, I think, about 4 to 5 times greater than the cost to retain a student. If you get one student to come back and they stick around through graduation, you're looking at about $40,000 in tuition and fees alone. If they spend some more time in housing, it could be another $20,000. And at our current cohort size, a 1 percentage point increase in retention would be about $500,000 in revenue. And it could even be higher because you may get sort of spillover benefits that benefit, transfer populations and other populations that aren't included in these kind of formal retention studies. So if there's any room in your schedule to spend time on some of these interventions that we're covering today, ultimately, I think it will pay off for your program, for your college, etc. So I am going to hand it over to Bethany, and she's going to take it from here.
Thank you, Peter. That was great. And I think you do have some questions in the chat pane if you needed to take a look at those. I'm going to share my screen and do another type of update. These are data that were shared with the Board of Trustees, and I wanted to share them in this session as well, just as a way to help you set kind of have some context and set the scene before you move into your workshops that start at 2 o'clock. You know, Peter did a great job reviewing the data. He provides us with very helpful data throughout the year. And prior to the board meeting, he shared some data with us that we were able to share with the Board of Trustees. We retained 77.2% of the freshmen who started with us in fall 21, who did return as sophomores in fall 22. Although that was below our goal, and I'll outline that in another slide, we do have some areas where we did see some really important progress and improvement. And I highlighted those areas that I just wanted to extract and call out today, because I think this is really good for us, very validating to see this as we move into, you know, the next 8 weeks and finishing out the fall semester, some things to be really proud about. So our percentage of Black freshmen who returned as sophomores increased from the year before by almost 13 percentage points. Our international freshmen were retained at almost or just over 4 percentage points higher than the year before. Our percentage of Pell eligible freshmen, that's a proxy metric for lower socioeconomic status, they were retained at just over 5 percentage points higher. And we narrowed our equity gap between our Black and white retention rates by over 16 percentage points. So this is very important to know and to understand as we move forward. And many thanks to everyone who really focused on these groups of students and supporting their success. Obviously, they're in meeting our goal, but we have some really good momentum here. Our goal for last year's cohort was to retain them at a rate of at least 78.5%. We fell short of that goal by 9 students, and so that helps put things in perspective by looking at the numbers that means. So 9 students doesn't sound like a lot, but you know how, you know, all of the work that goes into retaining our students. So that additional work, we'll need to find a way to do that together. Peter has another metric that's a 3-year average, and it helps to smooth some of the, you know, the highs and lows of the data over time, and it shows us what that looks like more in a temporal view. So you can see that over time, and since 2013, we've seen a trend of an increase in 3.8 percentage points, and that's what this graph here is showing. So this graph is a little bit different. This is showing a year-to-year view of our retention rates. You can see here the purple shows the year-to-year goals that we have moving forward, and the 77.2 denotes the rate at which we retained our fall 21 freshmen. And so what our goal is for this current cohort of freshmen is to retain them at a rate of at least 79%. And what that means in numbers is at least 683 of our original 865 students need to come back next fall as sophomores for us to achieve that 79%. We're doing a lot to support student success. This was the advising model that we rolled out last fall, and you can get an idea just reading through this that we want every student to feel very supported in multiple ways. In addition to this year, the team is thinking about how do we expand this framework to include additional supports that we have in place, and how do we make sure that every student knows about these supports and can connect to them easily. So that's the work that we've been doing the last few weeks. Also, last academic year, we made important progress in some other areas. And you can read through this list, but I wanted to just highlight a few of those. Certainly, we're using Linden Circle to a fuller capacity. More people are using it, which is great to see. We have a peer mentoring model that was also launched as part of the diagram that I showed before. Peter's doing a wonderful job helping us set milestone targets and understanding where we're at in retaining this cohort. And we're also able to look at the risk score reporting and the danger zone reporting to prompt action with those higher risk students. We've done a few other things that are more policy and practice related. You can see the Talk Before You Drop campaign that was inspired by some work that was happening in Plaster College of Business and Entrepreneurship that we brought into mainstream practice across the campus. And then we also, through the efforts and leadership of Kevin Manley, have a week-by-week advising syllabus and additional training for advising, which is wonderful in helping us all develop that capacity to serve in those roles. We're working on a leave of absence policy that will be very helpful. And last October, we launched the Q2 Every Student Counts campaign that involves some campus-wide communication, as well as us coming together to put a plan in place that has 10 work packages, and you can see the different things that this plan intends to achieve. And some of these things are longer range efforts that will take time to unfold, such as general education revision. But you can read down the list and see that, we are chipping away at some of these and doing more in these areas. And my last slide is just to highlight some additional new efforts that have been put into place this fall. The last initiative was proposed by Dr. Kevin Manley and his team. This stands for Lindenwood Academic Success Team. And working with the deans and the faculty in the colleges, we're able to provide some additional support and outreach to our higher risk students. So this is a very concentrated effort with a very, particular group of students, and that's happening in the college with, in partnership with the advising team. Res Excel is a curriculum that Kelly Moyich's team has implemented into the residence halls. So our students who do live on campus are able to participate in this. It's aligned with our learning attributes, and it is able to, it's a way for us to engage students who live here on campus. Learning communities are paired classes for the same students to take together and have that greater sense of belonging and that connection with others. We, as you all will probably already know, we have a separate now office of online and post-traditional affairs to offer dedicated support to adult and online students. And so that's really ramping up this fall to be able to advise effectively our Wiley students who will be coming back, as well as our LU Global students who we will be welcoming when that launches. We have a second year council to support students who are in their second year. Leo Cares is a newer behavioral intervention initiative. And then we have a group of a group of colleagues who attended the Equity in Retention Institute this past year and brought back some wonderful ideas, and they have formed a task force to put those ideas into practice. And just finally, I'll add that we have a small team that they've put together a Breaking 80 plan. This is a plan that outlines some key initiatives. Many of those are related to the data that Peter shared with you about enhancing support in gateway courses, some bridge opportunities, some additional support for math and English classes. So the Breaking 80 plan is a plan that would ideally help us hit and exceed 80% retention of our fall 2023 freshman class. And so we are in the process now of outlining that in more detail and hopefully sharing that with you by before winter break. So I think this is my last slide, and I want to pass it. Oh, no, I have one more slide. This is just a reminder slide. We've already seen this, but I put this at the end before we move into our breakout session. So you have a clear idea of the goal we're trying to achieve, and that's to hit at least 79% retention of our current freshman class. So we want to see at least 683 of those students return in fall 2023 as sophomores. And then you can get an idea there of the goals year over year. Now I think that's my last slide. So before you go to your workshops, Kate Harrell's going to come on to the call and tell us how to move off of this call and onto the workshop that you signed up for. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany. I have a couple of like housekeeping items. So we are going to drop into the chat a Qualtrics survey that we would like for everyone to answer. You'll probably get it also by email, but if you don't, we're going to drop it into the chat. But please wait until after the second workshop session to complete the survey. We're going to drop it into the workshop sessions too, but in case you don't make it to those, we want everybody to have the links. We're going to ask you to kind of reflect on the plenary session and the workshops and answer a few questions for us. But to get to the workshop sessions, you're going to have to exit this session. So you'll leave the meeting, go back to the Lindenwood Learning Academy website, and then select Watch Now to go to the workshop session that you chose during registration. So we are going to record those workshop sessions. So I'm going to jump around and get those recordings started. It looks like we have a few minutes before those start at 2 o'clock. So if you need to take a small break before you join us, I want to thank Bethany Alden Rivers for presenting for us today, and for Peter Weitzel and Aaron Schilling for putting together all of that helpful data, and for Dr. Porter for coming to show his support and of all the retention efforts that we have going on. So hopefully you get some good ideas for some strategies you can use in the workshop sessions relative to the information that was presented here this morning. And just, we're so grateful you're here, and thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you at 2.
Yeah, honey. If anybody needs navigation assistance to your breakout session, just let me know. I can show you that.
I need that. I didn't know that we had to do anything else.
All right. So when you registered, you probably selected both the main session and
Oh, I
the
see it now.
breakout. So
Yeah.
if you would go, so from the Learning Academy, you could go to the calendar, go Fall Retention Workshop, and then you could go to event. And then down here, it should break out the different sessions. So in my case, I
Thank you.
registered for Jeremy's thing. And if I click watch now, it should hop me over there. Worst case scenario, if the whole Learning Academy thing completely fails for you, I do have direct links to these sessions. The downside of that is if you go through the Learning Academy, it automatically logs your professional development. If you go through my route of the direct links, it will not. So ideally you go through the Learning Academy, but if that fails, I'm going to kind of stay in the general session here and help out anybody who needs navigation assistance.